Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're in part 3 of our study of the Minor Prophets, part of our continuing series of the Old Testament, surveying the Old Testament. And we're coming today to the book of Haggai, but first we need to back up a little bit and look at the historical background to this and the last 3 books of the Old Testament. We're in the post-exilic prophets. Those prophets are going to be Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And of course, this is the time in history when the Israelites have been allowed to come back into the land after the Babylonian captivity. Remember, Babylon fell to the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. Cyrus the Great, and the king of that combined kingdom, conquers Babylon. And the first thing he does, he says, everyone is allowed to go home. Those bad old Babylonians are gone. I'm the liberator. Go home. Be sure you pay your taxes to me. Have a great day. And they're allowed to go back home and rebuild their temple. And they begin work on the rebuilding of the temple, but it's not long before the work hits a snag. You see, Cyrus the Great had given them permission to go back and rebuild. They are rebuilding, and there are those in the land, those people that are non-Jewish people, and they see a temple being built, and they say, oh, this is good, we love temples, we'll bring some of our gods and we'll be all happy with you. And the Jews say, no, we can't have that. That's how we got into trouble the first time. We started worshiping other gods, and we need to separate ourselves from that. And offense is taken. So even though permission had been given under Cyrus the Great to rebuild the temple, that permission is revoked during the reign of Cambyses. The construction is halted as a result of that. And the work continues unfinished. The temple continues in that unfinished state for year after year after year. Finally, there's going to be 2 prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. They stand up and they prophesy, and they urge the construction to begin again, even though royal permission, has not yet been given. And yet the people are going to step out in faith, and they're going to follow the words of Haggai and Zechariah. Ezra chapter 5 verses 1 and 2 tell the story from the historical narrative when the prophets Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them. Then Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Yeshua the son of Jozadak arose and began to rebuild the house of God which is in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. Now that was the tough news. The good news is when the work is challenged, the new emperor, who by this time is Darius the Great, he orders an investigation to be made because the charge is that the Jews are rebelling. And in this investigation it is discovered the scroll in which Cyrus the Great had originally given permission. And Darius says, oh, you mean Cyrus the Great gave permission? In that case, you can go ahead and continue building the temple. In fact, you can pay for it out of the royal treasury. After all, you put your own money in that. It's sort of a rebate in your taxes. And the permission is given officially now to continue with that work, and the temple will be rebuilt. So the date of Haggai and Zechariah, notice we just read that they are contemporaries. They are going to begin their prophecy around 520 BC. By 516 BC, the temple will be completed. Notice that 70 years to the day since the temple had been destroyed. It had been destroyed in 586 BC. Now 516 BC, the temple is completed. And so at this point, we can say the Babylonian captivity is officially at an end. Yes, they've been allowed to return to the land back in 539 BC. They've been in the land for some time. And then when we get to the book of Ezra, we noted that about halfway through the book of Ezra, we see Ezra himself returning, but that's much later. That's 458 BC. And then a third return after that is going to be under Nehemiah, where he rebuilds the wall. Now we're ready to look at the book of Haggai. In the 2nd year of Darius the king, on the 1st day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, this people says the time has not come, even the time for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt. They wanted it rebuilt, but it just wasn't time. They had come into building permit issues. The construction had been halted, and there's a time and date for everything, and they felt this just must not be the time. Verses 3 through 5, then the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet, saying, is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses, while this house lies desolate? Now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. And there's a call to reflect, to discern. What are you going to do? Are you going to obey the law of the land, or are you going to obey the Lord in that place where it contradicts the law of the land? The call then is consider your ways, and the problem that's stated is there has come to be a problem of priorities. That is, the people are more concerned with their own welfare, with their own rights, with, yes, obeying the law, and that's good unless the law of the Lord contradicts it, and then you obey the Lord first. And they've grown content in the way things are, and this is a call for a reevaluation. You have sown much, verse 6, but harvest little. You eat, but there is not enough to be satisfied. You drink, but there is not enough to become drunk. You put on clothing, but no one is warm enough. And he who earns wages to put into a purse withholds. Do you ever feel like that financially in these days of inflation, and there just never seems to be enough? There's a general dissatisfaction. God says, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe the reason is that your priorities are wrong. So there's a dissatisfaction that is apparent. And verse 7, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. There's that statement again, that command again. It's going to become something of a refrain in the prophet's writing. Consider your ways, go up to the mountains, bring wood, and rebuild the temple, that I may be pleased with it and be glorified, says the Lord. So God says, go and finish the work, rebuild the temple. Therefore, because of you, the sky has withheld its dew, and the earth has withheld its produce. I called for a drought on the land, on the mountains, on the grain, on the new wine, on the oil, on what the ground produces, on men, on cattle, and all the labor of your hands. This is going back to that curse that we saw way back in Leviticus chapter 26. God says, if you don't obey me, I'm going to hurt the crops, I'm going to stop the rain, I'm going to do all these things, and we're going to start all those cycles of discipline over again. You don't want to go there. So our first sermon, and this is going to be organized into 3 sermons, and then we'll see a conclusion at the end. Only 2 chapters in this entire book. In chapters 1, verses 1 through 15, the question then comes up, how can your houses be paneled while God's house lies desolate? How can you just allow the temple to continue in that unfinished state? And as a result, the response to the first sermon, the people came and they worked. Even though, as we noted, they did not have official permission from the Persian Empire, but God provides. He provides the work, He provides the permission, He even provides the money to pay for it all. And it's a wonderful thing when the people of God step out on faith that God answers them. Now we come to the second sermon. The second sermon, where there's going to be a question asked. The question will be asked, how does this temple compare with the former temple? Let's look at it in verse 1. On the 21st day of the 7th month, the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet, saying, Speak now to Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua the son of Jehozadak the high priest, and to the remnant of the people, saying, Who is left among you who saw this temple in its former glory, and how do you see it now? Does it not seem to you like nothing in comparison. Have you ever had the experience of going back to your elementary school, that school where you were at in either first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade, and you go back, and the first thing you notice is how small it is. Now remember, it's been 70 years since the temple was standing. The previous temple was standing. They've been in Babylonian captivity, and the temple was desolated for 70 years, and now it's been completed. And the only people that can remember what the temple used to look like, when they can remember when it used to look like, they had been children back then, and they look at it now, and it seemed like back then it was so much bigger, so much grander, and look at it now, it seems so much smaller. And so there's a twofold response to this question. First of all, the response is that the nations will come, God says, and I will fill this house with glory. I'm going to bring the nations to it, and then you're going to see the glory of God. You see, they finished building the temple just like they had finished building Solomon's temple, and when they had finished building Solomon's temple, the glory of God had come in. Now they finished building this one, but the glory of God has not come yet. And there's a promise that it's going to come. I will fill this house with glory, and the nations are going to come. So those are the two things that we're going to see. Of course, we see that fulfilled not in the near future, but we see it fulfilled in Acts chapter 2, when God's presence, His glory, comes into His people. And that becomes the coming of the nations and the building, the finishing of God's true spiritual temple. The second part of the response, and we see this is the rest of the story, is where Haggai is told, the latter glory of this house will be greater than the former glory. You think that was great, that you had this wonderful temple? I'm going to have a temple that fills the whole world, because it's going to be made of all of God's people. So we have the first sermon, ask the question, how does this temple compare with the former temple? The answer, the latter glory will be greater than the former glory. This brings us to the third sermon. In the third sermon, the question is, does the unclean produce clean? In other words, how can you have a clean temple made from unclean hands? And that's a real question. I think it's answering what kind of temple we're going to deal with, who's really going to build the temple. And the response is that there is a cleansing, judgment, and future blessings that are on their way. Wait until you see those. We come to the end of this short little book, chapter 2, verses 20 and 23. And here are some closing words that are given to Zerubbabel. Now remember, Zerubbabel is in the kingly family, but he's not a king. He's a descendant of David, but his line had been removed from the throne and is not going to be brought back to the throne. In fact, there had been a closing prophecy about one of his ancestors, Jeconiah, also known as Coniah, also known as Jehoiachin. And in that prophecy, God had said, even if you're like a signet ring, I will pull you off. And yet here he's going to say something very different to Zerubbabel. He's going to say to Zerubbabel, I will make you like a signet ring. Then the word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai on the 24th day of the month, saying, Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. I'm going to do something marvelous. And I will overthrow the thrones of kingdoms, and destroy the power of kingdoms of the nations. And I will overthrow the chariots and their riders, and the horses by their riders will go down, and everyone by the sword of another. And so there's going to be some great things happening. And watch what I do. I'm going to shake up the whole world. On that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will take you, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, my servant, declares the Lord, and I will make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts. Now, we just mentioned there was that prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 22, verses 24 through 25, spoken to Zerubbabel's, I guess would be great-granddaddy, Jehoiachin, or also known as Coniah, and he's called Coniah here in this verse. As I live, declares the Lord, even though Coniah the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, were a signet ring on my right hand, yet I would pull you off because of his sin, the sin of his father, and I will give you over into the hand of those who are seeking your life, yes, into the hand of those whom you dread, even into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hand of the Chaldeans. And that had happened exactly the way that it had been prophesied. And since that time there had not been a king upon the throne of Judah. And yet there's promise now that there's going to be a change. There's going to be something that happens in spite of this promise, where Zerubbabel will be considered a signet ring, a promissory ring, as it were, in the hand of the Lord. Let's see how this takes place. When we look at the genealogies in the New Testament, first of all, the genealogy of the Messiah that's presented in Matthew, we see that this on our left-hand side of this chart, and then I superimpose it right next to it, the genealogy of Luke on the right-hand side. In both cases, we have the Messiah traced through from Abraham all the way down to David. And then in Matthew's genealogy, it goes from David to Solomon through a bunch of kings that reigned there, all the way down to Jeconiah, also known as Coniah, also known as Jehoiachin, of whom we just read. And then it comes to Zerubbabel, but then it moves out again to Eli and brings us all the way down to Joseph, who, yes, was the legal father of Jesus, but according to Matthew chapter 1, was not the physical father of Jesus, because Jesus was born of a virgin. Now, notice in the genealogy of Luke, it takes us all the way down to David, but then it follows a different son of David, a son by the name of Nathan, or Nathan if you want to pronounce it that way, down through Neri. But then there is, notice, a correlation, whether this is the same Zerubbabel or a different one, that's hard to say, but I'm going to treat it, at least for the moment, that it's the same Zerubbabel. And you say, wait a minute, how can Zerubbabel have two parents? Well, it could have happened, there could have been an adopted thing going on. It could have been something where a father died and a mother gave birth through another husband or something like that. There are a number of ways, and we don't know how exactly it takes place. But it seems that Luke, we know when we read the story of the Gospel of Luke, he's telling the story of Jesus from Mary's point of view, and so it has been surmised, this doesn't make it automatically correct, but it has been suggested that Luke is presenting the genealogy of not of Joseph, but actually of Mary. And so notice it goes all the way down, but it does go down. Joseph is mentioned, Jacob, Joseph, as supposed, as people sort of put that together, whether it was correct or not. And so what we have, if this is correct, we have Jesus, the one who was the adopted son of Joseph and therefore had the legal right to the throne, and yet who was born of a virgin, born of Mary, having the physical genealogy going back to David. And these two are matched up. These two genealogies come together when we consider both the parents of Jesus, both Joseph and Mary. So the book concludes, "On that day declares the Lord of hosts, I will take you, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, my servant, declares the Lord, and I will make you like a signet ring." A signet ring was a ring of authority. It was the ring of promise, where you would take that seal that was on the ring and you would press it into hot wax, and whatever you were saying was guaranteed. It was promised on the basis of that ring. And God says, you're my ring, Zerubbabel. You are representative of the promise that I have made, because I have chosen you, and it's through you that I'm going to do something that will shake the nations, that will shake the world, that will save the world. I'm going to bring my son through you. And I think this is a messianic promise, a promise looking forward to the coming of Jesus.